A nurse agrees to an unusual request from a dying millionaire, and what happens next changes their lives forever. Shocking revelations and a relentless battle for a fortune's legacy set the stage for an ending no one saw coming. Mary, at 27 years old, always believed that her career as a nurse would be her salvation, both professionally and personally. However, life has a peculiar way of testing us, and that's exactly what happened to her. With countless closed doors, her savings were quickly dwindling, and the growing concern about her health only added to her anxiety. In a reality where bills were piling up and hope seemed increasingly distant, Mary found herself at a crossroads, questioning whether she had the strength to continue her journey. It's interesting to note how in moments of crisis, the most valuable lessons often emerge. Mary, for example, was forced to learn the importance of reinventing herself and seeking out-of-the-box solutions. In a city where opportunities seemed scarce, she began to explore alternative ways to remain active in the healthcare field. From offering her services as a home care nurse to assisting in small clinics, Mary tried everything to stay afloat. Yet these initiatives, while commendable, were not enough to cover her basic needs, and with each passing day, the fear of not being able to bounce back became more tangible. And as if the financial pressure wasn't enough, Mary was also quietly battling her own health issues. Those small signs she initially ignored began to intensify. First, there were the occasional headaches, then the constant fatigue that seemed to drain her energy. But Mary, with her unyielding determination, refused to give in. She knew she needed a stable job to take care of herself and ensure a better future. After all, with her experience and dedication, she was confident that an opportunity was out there waiting for her, even if she didn't know where. In times like these, it's essential to recognize our limits and know when to ask for help. Mary, stubborn as she was, often tried to carry the world on her shoulders alone, believing she could overcome everything without relying on anyone. But the truth is, no matter how strong a person is, there are moments when a support network is crucial. Friends and family may not have all the answers, but their words of encouragement and emotional support can be the difference between giving up or continuing the fight. And that was exactly what Mary experienced, though still reluctant to fully accept that help. As sleepless nights became more frequent and doubts began to haunt her thoughts, Mary realized that her mental health was deteriorating along with her physical condition. The constant stress and lack of answers began to weigh on her. She, who had always been the fortress for so many others in their moments of vulnerability, now found herself fragile, in need of the same care she used to offer. But instead of succumbing to despair, Mary decided she needed a change in perspective. And it was in one of those solitary moments of reflection that she promised herself she wouldn't give up, no matter how tough the situation became. Yet, even with this renewed determination, Mary knew she needed something more concrete. She needed an opportunity that would not only provide financial stability, but also reignite her passion for nursing, that flame that was slowly dying out. And this is where our story begins to unfold into something much larger than Mary could have imagined. Just when she believed hope was running out, something unexpected happens, changing the course of her life forever. Just as everything seemed to be falling apart, Mary was surprised by an unexpected phone call. The phone rang at one of those moments when she was on the verge of giving up, reflecting on her dwindling options. On the other end of the line was a firm and cold voice introducing herself as Eleanor. Without any preamble, Eleanor explained that she urgently needed a nurse to care for her critically ill husband, Mr. Allen. At first, Mary was intrigued by the call. After all, who in their right mind would seek out a nurse so abruptly and without even a formal interview? But sometimes, fate presents itself in curious ways. Eleanor, as she described her husband's condition, made it clear that the job would require total and immediate dedication. Mary, still hesitant, pondered over the offer. The opportunity seemed almost too good to be true, especially given the desperation she felt for financial stability. However, there was something in the way Eleanor spoke that unsettled her, as if there was more to this story than she was willing to reveal. But the bills weren't stopping, and Mary's declining health left her with few choices. Accepting seemed to be the only viable option at that moment. As soon as she hung up the phone, Mary realized the weight of the decision she had just made. The challenge was significant, but so was the reward. Working for a wealthy family like the Allens could not only resolve her immediate financial problems, but also open doors she never knew existed. Nevertheless, that nagging feeling of distrust lingered, and Mary couldn't shake the thought that something was out of place. Time, however, was not on her side, and the urgency of the situation demanded that she set aside her doubts and focus on the job ahead. While packing her few belongings, Mary reflected on the irony of life. For so long, she had searched for an opportunity to pull herself out of the hole she was in, and now that a chance had finally appeared, she couldn't rid herself of the feeling that she was walking into something dangerous. But, like so many times before, Mary decided to trust her ability to handle the unexpected. After all, her experience as a nurse had taught her that even in the most critical situations, there is always a way to adapt and move forward. During the journey to the Allens' mansion, Mary had plenty of time to think about what awaited her. The landscape around her became increasingly opulent as she approached the address Eleanor had provided, only heightening her anxiety. The nurse, who had always worked in modest conditions, now found herself heading to one of the most luxurious properties in the region. Little did she know, this new job would not only be a professional opportunity, but also a plunge into a sea of secrets and revelations that would forever change her perspective on family, justice, and loyalty. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions, Mary prepared herself for what was to come. She knew that her life would never be the same after that phone call, but at that moment, she could only hope that accepting the job was the right decision. And though the uncertainties were many, one thing was certain. The encounter with the Allens would mark the beginning of a journey that would push her to face challenges greater than she ever imagined. Upon arriving at the imposing Allen mansion, Mary found herself standing before a structure that seemed straight out of a movie. The grandeur of the property was simply overwhelming. The tall walls, ornate gates, and impeccably manicured gardens clearly indicated that this was the residence of a very wealthy family. However, as she passed through the gates and followed the long path to the main entrance, Mary couldn't shake a chill that ran down her spine. The opulence surrounding her felt suffocating, and she couldn't help but wonder if this would truly be a good place to work. As she was greeted at the entrance by Eleanor, Mary's initial impression only deepened. Eleanor, a woman of imposing stature and rigid expression, looked Mary up and down with a mix of disdain and apathy. The forced smile she attempted seemed more like a formality than a sincere gesture of welcome. During the few minutes they spent together, it became clear to Mary that Eleanor's relationship with her husband, Mr. Allen, was at the very least distant. There was a disturbing coldness in her voice as she described her husband's critical condition, as if his illness was more of an inconvenience than a cause for concern. As Eleanor led Mary through the vast hallways of the mansion, briefly explaining what she needed to know about the job, the nurse noticed the impersonal tone with which Eleanor spoke about her husband. Eleanor mentioned Mr. Allen's condition, as one would discuss any ordinary problem, with no empathy or sign of distress. This left Mary deeply uncomfortable. It was strange for her to see someone treat such a grave situation with such indifference. Deep down, she felt that something was terribly wrong in that house, but she couldn't yet grasp what it was. The visit to Mr. Allen's room was a pivotal moment for Mary. Upon entering the room, which resembled a presidential suite in a luxury hotel, the heavy and silent atmosphere was palpable. The room was adorned with expensive furniture and artwork, but the air was thick with sadness and loneliness. Mr. Allen, a man who had once been robust and full of life, now lay in a large bed surrounded by medical equipment. The contrast between the mansion's opulence and the fragility of the man on the brink of death was staggering. And for Mary, the sight of Eleanor standing by the bed without showing any affection for her husband confirmed her suspicions. With each passing minute, Mary became more convinced that there was much more beneath the surface of this facade of wealth and power. She began to realize that caring for Mr. Allen would be more challenging than she initially imagined, not just because of his grave condition, but also because of the emotionally toxic environment surrounding him. Mary knew that to succeed there, she would need not only her professional skills, but also an inner strength she had never before had to access. And so, as she watched Eleanor's imposing figure leave the room without even glancing back, Mary felt that she was about to embark on a journey that would test her limits in ways she had never anticipated. With a heavy heart, but determined to do her best, Mary prepared herself to face the challenges ahead, knowing that her arrival at that mansion marked only the beginning of something much larger. Upon entering Mr. Allen's room, Mary was immediately struck by the gravity of the situation. The air, already heavy with the cold opulence of the mansion, felt even denser here. The man lying in the bed, so fragile and vulnerable, barely resembled the powerful figure she had imagined when first hearing his name. Mr. Allen was on the brink of death, and it was clear that he urgently needed care, more than what had been provided up until that point. Mary knew there was no time to waste. Every minute could be crucial in saving his life. With the sharp instincts of a dedicated professional, Mary quickly assessed the patient's condition. His pale skin, weak and irregular breathing, and distant gaze indicated that he was in critical condition. It was as if his body was slowly shutting down, abandoned to its fate. Mary couldn't help but wonder how someone could allow a man to reach this point without seeking help sooner. But there was no time for regrets. She needed to act, and act fast. Her training and experience as a nurse led her to make quick decisions, beginning by stabilizing Mr. Allen's vital signs and closely monitoring his condition. The situation demanded more than just medical care. It required a human touch, something that until then seemed completely absent from Mr. Allen's life. Mary, sensing the loneliness in the patient's eyes, decided that in addition to treating him physically, she would also provide the emotional comfort he clearly needed. She held his hand firmly, conveying a sense of security that, miraculously, seemed to reach his weakened heart. For a brief moment, he squeezed back, showing that despite everything there was still life and hope within him. As minutes turned into hours, Mary dedicated herself entirely to Mr. Allen, applying all the knowledge she had acquired over the years. She adjusted the medication, reorganized the equipment, and made sure everything was in place to provide the best care possible. The room, once silent and oppressive, was now filled with a new energy, an energy of struggle and resilience. With every gesture, every word of encouragement whispered to the patient, Mary reinforced her determination not to let this man succumb to his illness without fighting with all her might. And so, as the night wore on, Mary began to notice small improvements in Mr. Allen's condition. His pulse stabilized, and his breathing, although still weak, started to regulate. Mary knew this was just the first battle of many to come, but the sense of victory, even if temporary, encouraged her to keep going. She felt that she was finally in the right place, making a difference where it was most needed. Mr. Allen, as debilitated as he was no longer alone in his fight, and that alone was a significant step toward recovery. However, deep in her mind, Mary couldn't ignore the almost spectral presence of Eleanor, who, even in her physical absence, seemed to hover over the situation with her icy indifference. The contrast between the care she was determined to provide and the negligence she perceived around her left Mary uneasy. Something in that scenario didn't add up, and Mary, already deeply involved, began to realize that her role there might be far more complex than just saving a man's life. She needed to stay alert, because what lay ahead could change everything. As the days passed, Mary couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong in the Allen mansion. Eleanor, with her imposing presence and cold demeanor, seemed indifferent to her husband's suffering. There were no gestures of affection, no words of comfort, nor any sign of genuine concern. For Mary, who always believed that emotional care was as important as physical care, this indifference was incomprehensible and, frankly, terrifying. How could someone be so distant in such a critical moment? The distrust began to grow within her, planting a seed of doubt she couldn't ignore. This distrust turned into real concern when Mary noticed small details that, on their own, might seem insignificant, but together formed a disturbing picture. The way Eleanor avoided her husband's room, her excuses for not being present during the most delicate moments, and above all, the vacant look she directed at Mr. Allen, were all indicators of something more sinister. Mary began to wonder if Eleanor was in fact interested in her husband's recovery, or if there was something more nefarious at play. The idea that someone could wish harm upon another, especially a loved one, was repulsive to Mary, but the evidence was beginning to point in that direction. Determined to protect Mr. Allen, Mary threw herself even more into his care, monitoring every detail of his treatment. She meticulously reviewed the medications, checked the dosages, and even observed the food served to him, ensuring that everything was in line with what had been prescribed. Each day, her connection with the patient grew stronger, and her determination to keep him safe only intensified. Mary knew she couldn't trust anyone else in that house, and the heavy responsibility drove her to be even more vigilant. Eleanor, on the other hand, seemed increasingly irritated by Mary's constant presence. The nurse noticed the disdainful looks and cutting remarks that Eleanor made, as if trying to unsettle her. But Mary, fortified by her growing affection for Mr. Allen, remained unfazed. She knew that at that moment, her duty was much greater than any personal discomfort. Protecting the patient's well-being had become her mission, and Mary was willing to do whatever it took to ensure that Mr. Allen received the care he deserved. Over time, the tension between Mary and Eleanor escalated, and the atmosphere in the mansion grew heavier. Mary, though always careful in her actions, began to realize that Eleanor was aware of her suspicion. The silent power struggle between the two was exhausting, but Mary did not back down. Each day she became more deeply involved in Mr. Allen's care, driven by both professional responsibility and the bond that was forming between her and the patient. And it was in this growing tension and mistrust that Mary realized her fight would not only be against the illness afflicting Mr. Allen, but also against unseen forces trying to prevent his recovery. With a heavy heart, but determined not to fail, Mary prepared herself for the challenges ahead, knowing she needed to stay one step ahead to protect the life of the man who had, in some way, become so important to her. As the days went by, Mary began to feel a deepening connection with Mr. Allen. What had started as a professional duty slowly transformed into something much more. The man who had initially seemed like just another patient to care for was now occupying a special place in her heart. Mr. Allen, in his fragility, showed a quiet gratitude for the care he was receiving, and Mary, in turn, felt that each act of kindness she offered was reciprocated with a trust and connection she had never experienced before. It was as if, together, they were not just fighting the illness, but also the shadows that loomed over the mansion. However, as this connection grew, Mary could no longer ignore the signs that her own health was deteriorating. The headaches returned more frequently, the fatigue became more intense, and at times she felt on the brink of collapse. But the desire to stay by Mr. Allen's side and ensure he received the care he deserved was stronger than any symptom she was facing. Mary knew she needed to take care of herself, but she simply couldn't bring herself to leave. The thought of leaving him in the hands of someone she didn't trust tormented her, and this concern kept her resolute in her decision to remain there. The relationship between Mary and Mr. Allen became increasingly special. Even in his most fragile moments, he made an effort to communicate with her, whether through a gentle squeeze of her hand or a look that conveyed deep gratitude. Mary, in turn, found herself sharing parts of her life with him, as if wanting him to know that she was not just there out of obligation, but because she genuinely cared. These small moments, these silent exchanges, further reinforced the bond between them. And even without words, they both knew they were united by something much greater than the situation that had brought them together. But not everything was rosy. Mary's declining health began to catch Eleanor's attention, who, with her characteristic coldness, suggested that it might be better for Mary to take a few days off to recover. However, Mary refused the suggestion without hesitation. She knew that any absence on her part could be detrimental to Mr. Allen, and the thought of leaving him alone filled her with anxiety. Moreover, Mary sensed that there was more behind Eleanor's suggestion, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, but which made her even more determined to stay. Her intuition told her that her presence there was essential, and Mary decided to trust that feeling. With each passing day, the situation in the Allen mansion became more complex. Mary, now completely immersed in Mr. Allen's recovery, began to realize that her internal struggle was intensifying. She was torn between caring for herself and ensuring that the man for whom she had developed such deep affection continued to receive the proper care. It was a difficult battle, but Mary was determined. Even with her health declining, she refused to abandon her post, knowing that somehow all of this was part of a larger purpose that she did not yet fully understand. And so, between pain and care, between sleepless nights and moments of tenderness, Mary found herself more involved than ever. The connection she felt with Mr. Allen grew stronger each day, becoming almost palpable, and while her health deteriorated, her determination only grew. She knew that, regardless of what was to come, she would not leave him alone. And that decision, which seemed so simple, was actually a harbinger of even greater challenges yet to come. One quiet afternoon, as the sun was setting and golden rays of light gently filtered through the windows, Mr. Allen made a request that completely took Mary by surprise. His voice, weakened by illness, almost got lost in the room, but the words he uttered carried immense weight. He asked Mary to, just for one day, pretend to be his daughter. Mary, initially confused by the request, wondered what could drive a man on the brink of death to make such a strange demand. However, looking into Mr. Allen's tired eyes, she realized that this was not a whimsical request, but rather something deeply rooted in an emotional need that she didn't fully understand yet. Moved by the compassion she already felt for him, Mary decided to agree. She knew that at that moment, more than ever, Mr. Allen needed comfort that went beyond medical care. He needed something that would bring him peace, even if just for a brief period. By assuming this role, Mary knew she was stepping into delicate territory, where emotional bonds could easily blur with professional responsibilities. But deep down, she also knew that at this stage, what mattered most was the patient's emotional well-being, and she was willing to do whatever it took to provide him with some comfort. The day that followed was, without a doubt, one of the strangest and yet most touching of Mary's life. She found herself caught up in a game of make-believe, where Mr. Allen treated her as if she were his real daughter. He spoke of moments they had never shared together, told stories that seemed taken from a life he never had. Mary, for her part, listened attentively, interacted with him affectionately, responding as if those stories were truly part of her life. At first, it all felt surreal, but soon she realized that what she was doing was more than just fulfilling a strange request. She was giving Mr. Allen something he had clearly lost over the years, a sense of belonging and of having a family. Eleanor, who had until then maintained a certain distance, seemed disturbed by the sudden closeness between Mary and Mr. Allen. Although she hadn't directly witnessed their interactions that day, it was evident that something was bothering her. Perhaps it was seeing her husband, even in his final days, finding comfort in someone else, or perhaps there was something deeper, some secret that had yet to be revealed. Whatever the reason, the tension between Mary and Eleanor reached a new level, and Mary knew she needed to be even more vigilant of Eleanor's intentions. Mr. Allen's request, however, was not just an attempt to relive lost moments, but also a way to test Mary's trust and loyalty. He knew he didn't have much time left, and he wanted to ensure that in his final days, he was surrounded by someone who truly cared about him. By asking Mary to play the role of daughter, he was in reality seeking confirmation that, even in the face of adversity, she would stand by his side. And Mary, with her heart full of compassion, responded to this trust in the only way she knew how, with complete dedication. That special day, though strange, brought a new perspective to Mary. She began to see Mr. Allen not just as a patient, but as someone who, despite all the circumstances, needed a genuine bond, even if just for a brief moment. And so, with her heart full of conflicting emotions, Mary prepared herself for what was to come, knowing that this request had changed everything between them and that the challenges ahead would be even more complex. The tension at the Allen mansion reached its peak when, on what seemed like an ordinary day, Eleanor arrived accompanied by a lawyer. Mary, already deeply involved in the situation, sensed that something serious was about to happen. The lawyer, a man with a stern appearance and precise gestures, seemed to be there with a specific purpose: to formalize Mr. Allen's will. His presence in the room, while Mr. Allen was still in a state of extreme frailty, made Mary's heart race. She was about to witness a crucial turning point in this story. Eleanor, always with her cold and calculating attitude, insisted that the will be signed immediately, regardless of her husband's weakened condition. The way she spoke, almost as if she were reciting a grocery list, sent a chill down Mary's spine. To Eleanor, this was just a necessary step to ensure everything was in order, but to Mary, it was clear that much more was at stake. She knew that by posing as Mr. Allen's daughter, she had become involved in something far more complex than simply caring for a patient. She was now unwittingly part of a much larger plot involving interests and power. The lawyer, noticing Mr. Allen's hesitation, gave Mary a questioning look, as if expecting her to intervene in some way. That exchange of glances made it clear to Mary that the role she was playing was not just symbolic. She was now an important piece on the board, and her next move could determine the outcome of this story. Despite her heavy heart, she knew she couldn't show any uncertainty. Her role at that moment was to protect the man she had promised to care for, even if it meant confronting Eleanor and her lawyer. As the tension grew, Mary felt the need to act quickly. She realized that the will was more than just a formality. It was the key to something much larger. Eleanor seemed far too eager to have everything settled, and this only increased Mary's suspicion. She began to question what Eleanor's true intentions were. Was she trying to secure her share of the inheritance at any cost? Was the lawyer involved in something more sinister? These questions hammered in Mary's mind as she found herself increasingly pressured to make a decision that could change the fate of everyone involved. Then, in an act of courage and perhaps even desperation, Mary decided to intervene. She requested that the will be read aloud, claiming she wanted to ensure her father fully understood what he was signing. Her voice, though calm, carried a firmness that took everyone by surprise, including Eleanor. The lawyer, for his part, hesitated for a moment, but faced with Mary's insistence, he had no choice but to comply. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. What had once been a mere cold formality now turned into a silent battle for control of the situation. As she listened to the words that would determine the fate of the Allen fortune, Mary realized she was being used as a key piece to legitimize something that clearly wasn't right. She, who had agreed to play the role of daughter out of compassion, now found herself in the middle of a plot where personal and family interests collided dangerously. And while Eleanor maintained her unshakable posture, Mary knew at that moment that she needed to stay alert and ready to act, because the signing of that document could change everything forever. The tension at the Allen mansion became unbearable after the reading of the will. Mary felt that the storm that had been brewing was finally about to explode. Mr. Allen's already fragile health took an unexpected turn for the worse, leading to a crisis that required immediate care. It was as if his body was finally succumbing to the pressure of weeks of illness and accumulated stress. Mary, ever vigilant, rushed to his room, determined to do whatever was necessary to stabilize him once again. But upon arriving, she found Eleanor, already accompanied by the lawyer, insisting that the will be signed right then, as if Mr. Allen's life was merely a secondary concern. For Mary, that was the final straw. How could someone be so insensitive, so inhumane as to prioritize financial matters over a person's life? Anger bubbled up inside her, but she knew she had to stay calm to handle the situation. With a firmness she had not yet shown, Mary confronted Eleanor. She positioned herself between Mr. Allen's bed and the lawyer, making it clear that as long as he was in a critical state, she would not allow any document to be signed. Her voice was low, but laden with determination, and her eyes, which had once avoided Eleanor's, now met hers directly, without fear. Eleanor, however, did not back down. Her usual coldness gave way to a veiled aggression. She accused Mary of interfering in matters that were none of her business, making it clear that she believed she had the right to demand the signing of the will, regardless of her husband's condition. To her, Mr. Allen's wishes were irrelevant at that moment. What mattered was ensuring everything was legally finalized before it was too late. But Mary, now deeply involved in the situation, was not willing to give in. She knew that Mr. Allen's life was in her hands, and she would not let him be pressured in such a vulnerable moment. The situation intensified when Mr. Allen, even in the midst of his crisis, tried to speak. His words were weak and broken, but there was something in his gaze that Mary understood immediately. He was asking for help. It was a silent, almost imperceptible plea. But to Mary, it was like a cry for rescue. She knew she had to act quickly. Without hesitation, Mary turned to the lawyer and demanded that he leave, stating that the most important thing at that moment was to save her father's life. The lawyer, caught off guard by the intensity of the situation, hesitated but eventually complied, leaving the room under Eleanor's furious gaze. The tension between Mary and Eleanor reached its peak. Eleanor, seeing her plan unravel, made one last effort to convince Mary that the signing was necessary, insinuating that without the will, things could get complicated for everyone. But Mary, now more certain than ever that she was on the right side, paid no attention. With a defiant look, she made it clear that her priority was Mr. Allen's health, and that any attempt at manipulation at that moment would not be tolerated. The battle between the two women, one fighting for life and the other for control, was one of the most intense Mary had ever faced. In the end, Mary managed to stabilize Mr. Allen, but she knew the fight was far from over. The confrontation with Eleanor had revealed the true nature of the woman, and Mary knew she would have to be more vigilant than ever. Mr. Allen's health crisis had passed, but the real battle was just beginning. And Mary, now more involved than she ever imagined, was ready to face whatever came next, determined to protect that man until the very end. After the latest health crisis, when everything seemed to have calmed down at the mansion, Mary was hit with a revelation that would change her life and Mr. Allen's forever. Still recovering, but with a clarity she had not seen in him before, Mr. Allen asked to speak with Mary in private. The expression on his face was serious, but there was also a vulnerability that Mary could not ignore. With a voice still weak but determined, he revealed the truth he had been holding on to for so many years. Mary was not just his dedicated nurse, she was his biological daughter. The words echoed through the room, leaving Mary in a state of shock. How could this be true? Mr. Allen explained that many years ago, during a time in his life marked by difficult decisions and secrets, he had been forced to give Mary up for adoption. Complex circumstances and external influences had led him to make that decision, one he had never been able to come to terms with. Life had moved on, but the guilt and sadness over that loss had stayed with him, silently, for all those years. And now, in his final days, he finally had the chance to make amends, to seek the reconciliation he had longed for. For Mary, the revelation was overwhelming. The woman who had spent her life believing she was just a simple nurse now discovered she was part of a much more complex and painful story. She found herself reliving moments from her childhood, questioning every part of her history, trying to find signs that could have revealed this truth earlier. But there was no time to dwell on the past or get lost in speculation. The present demanded from her an even greater strength to process this new information and decide how to act. Despite the initial shock, something inside Mary began to settle, as if, in some way, this revelation brought a sense of completeness. Mr. Allen, for his part, seemed to have found a new reason to fight. Knowing that he had finally revealed the truth to Mary gave him an energy she had not seen in him before. He knew time was short, but he wanted to use it to build something they never had. A relationship as father and daughter, even if belatedly. Mary, still processing everything, realized that, in a way, this newfound bond explained the deep connection she had always felt with him. From that moment on, their relationship took a new turn, driven by a mutual desire to get to know each other better and make up for lost time. Eleanor, upon realizing that her manipulation attempt was unraveling, could no longer ignore the new dynamic between Mary and Mr. Allen. The secret she had also known and tried to keep hidden was finally out in the open, leaving her in a vulnerable position. Mary now had more than just a professional responsibility. She had a birthright, something that completely changed the power structure within that house. And with this new revelation, Eleanor knew her struggle for control was becoming increasingly difficult. From that day forward, Mary began to see herself not just as Mr. Allen's nurse, but as someone with the right and duty to protect her family. The revelation about her true identity brought forth a strength she didn't know she had. Now, besides caring for her father's health, she was determined to uncover the whole truth about the past, understand the choices that had been made, and protect the legacy that was rightfully hers. With a heart full of new emotions and a renewed determination, Mary knew the journey was only just beginning. The Allen mansion, which had long been a place of secrets and hidden tensions, finally saw the truth come to light in a powerful way. With the revelation that Mary was, in fact, Mr. Allen's biological daughter, the pieces began to fall into place in a disturbing way. Mary, now more determined than ever, began to investigate Eleanor's past and intentions. And that's when the darkest secrets of the mansion were uncovered. Eleanor had not only neglected her husband, but had also been involved in sinister plans to ensure that the Allen fortune would fall into her hands for good. Mary's suspicions, which had been simmering from the start, were confirmed when she found concrete evidence that Eleanor had, in fact, attempted to poison Mr. Allen on several occasions. The discovery was devastating, but also brought a sense of urgency and justice that Mary could not ignore. She knew she had to act quickly to protect her father and ensure that Eleanor faced the consequences of her actions. The nurse, now a daughter and heir, found herself in a position of power she had never imagined, and she used this newfound influence to mobilize the authorities and expose Eleanor's atrocities. When the police finally arrived at the mansion, the atmosphere was electric. Eleanor, always cold and controlled, seemed to have lost her composure. She tried to argue, denying all the accusations, but the evidence was irrefutable. The investigation revealed that she had administered small doses of poison to Mr. Allen, which explained his constant deterioration, something Mary had been fighting so hard to reverse. The discovery of the poison was the final proof the authorities needed to take Eleanor into custody. Seeing her arrested did not bring Mary a sense of vengeance, but rather of relief. Finally, the shadow that had loomed over the mansion was being lifted. The impact of this revelation was profound for everyone involved. Mr. Allen, still fragile but now safe from Eleanor's grasp, seemed to come back to life. Knowing that the person he had trusted for so long had betrayed that trust in such a vile way was painful, but having Mary by his side gave him the strength he needed to continue. For Mary, Eleanor's arrest represented not only the victory of justice, but also the end of a painful chapter in her life. She knew there was still much to be done, especially regarding her father's recovery, but at least now they could move forward without the constant threat that Eleanor represented. The events at the Allen mansion soon became news, with the media covering the scandal involving one of the most respected families in the region. Mary, who had always avoided the spotlight, now found herself at the center of a story that could easily be a movie script, but she remained composed, knowing that the most important thing was to ensure her father's well-being and the restoration of peace in their lives. Justice had prevailed, but the scars left by Eleanor would take time to heal. With Eleanor out of the picture, Mary and Mr. Allen began to think about the future. They knew that to move forward, they would need to rebuild not only their lives, but also the trust and security that had been destroyed. Eleanor's arrest marked the beginning of a new chapter, where father and daughter could finally begin to heal the wounds of the past and work together to create a future that honored the true essence of the Allen family. With Eleanor finally out of their lives, Mary and Mr. Allen were at last able to start rebuilding their bond and look to the future with a new perspective. The truth about their relationship brought with it a sense of relief and renewal. For Mary, the process of accepting her new role as Mr. Allen's daughter was as challenging as it was transformative. The uncertainties that had haunted her now gave way to a feeling of belonging and purpose, something she had been searching for her entire life, even without realizing it. Mr. Allen's recovery was slow but steady. With Mary by his side, he regained not only his physical strength, but also found a new motivation to live. The bond that began to form between them was something genuine and powerful, shaped by the adversities they had faced together. Mr. Allen, once a man surrounded by luxury and power, now saw in the simplicity and honesty of his relationship with Mary the true wealth. And for Mary, every moment spent with her father was an opportunity to learn more about him and herself. Together, they decided to channel this new energy into something that could benefit others. Mr. Allen, who had always been at the helm of a vast pharmaceutical empire, saw an opportunity to use his resources and influence to make a more meaningful difference. With Mary's help, he began to overhaul the care practices at his institution, seeking to implement more patient-centered and humane methods. Mary, with her hands-on experience and dedication, brought valuable insights on how to improve the quality of care, making it more empathetic and effective. The collaboration between father and daughter not only strengthened their bond, but also began to transform the Allen Pharmaceutical Institute into a model of innovation and compassionate care. They worked together to create training programs that emphasized the importance of the relationship between caregiver and patient, something Mary had always believed to be fundamental. The journey they had taken not only united them, but also inspired them to spread this message, positively impacting the lives of thousands of others. As the days passed, the Allen mansion, once a symbol of secrets and tension, became a true home. Mary and Mr. Allen came to cherish simple moments together, like walking through the gardens or having long conversations at sunset. These small activities, which had once seemed trivial, now held deep meaning. They were building memories that, although late, were full of significance and love. The mansion, which once felt oppressive, now radiated a new energy, born from the genuine union between father and daughter. Mary and Mr. Allen's new beginning was marked not only by the rebuilding of their lives, but also by the legacy they were creating for future generations. Together, they proved that even in the face of the greatest adversities, it is possible to find strength in truth and love. And so, as they looked toward the future, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with the confidence and courage that only such a deep bond could provide. As Mary and Mr. Allen step into this new chapter of their lives, their journey together serves as a powerful reminder that no matter how deep the darkness, the light of truth and love can always find its way through. They have shown that by embracing vulnerability, building trust and holding on to hope, even the most complex and painful pasts can be healed. But this is not just a story about overcoming adversity. It's a call to action for all of us. What about you? How can you bring this kind of transformative change into your own life? Whether it's mending a fractured relationship, standing up for what's right, or simply being there for someone in need, the lessons from Mary and Mr. Allen's journey are clear. Resilience, compassion, and courage can lead to profound personal growth and stronger connections with those we care about. So I encourage you to reflect on the challenges you face. Are there areas in your life where you can apply these principles? How might you take steps today to create the kind of meaningful, lasting change that Mary and Mr. Allen have achieved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights could inspire others to take action as well. And if you found value in this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. This way, you won't miss out on future stories and lessons that can help you continue growing, learning, and living with purpose. After all, the journey doesn't end here. There's always more to discover and more ways to make a difference.